So, Christina, thank you for being here today. It's nice to see you again. I want to start our conversation by asking you about revolving doors, actually, because you can go to a bank in Brazil and not see a revolving door in front of it. But I remember a couple of years ago, you and the Nubank staff actually put a revolving door in a museum right next to the paintings, right next to the portraits. What was the point you were trying to make there?
Since we started Nubank and we started issuing credit cards, people were very anxious to be able to just completely cut the cords, like with the traditional banking system. But they needed more from us. They needed an account product. They needed a debit card. Not everyone could be approved for the credit card product. So there was a moment in which we were ready to give people that. And the way that we thought about this was what was standing in the way of people cutting the cords and becoming our customers fully was now gone. And when we thought about things that stood in the way, the revolving doors were the perfect metaphor. So the way that we communicated that to our customers was by grabbing one of those revolving doors and landing them as an exhibition in one of the nicest museums in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So it was really a nice way to draw attention to the fact that there was nothing else standing in their way, that they could finally cut the cord from the past and really take the next step in terms of making their lives so much easier.
You're actually doing a pretty good job in stealing customers from those banks with the revolving doors. I mean, you've hit the 40 million customer mark during the pandemic. What do you make of that success?
It's been so interesting because when we first started, I used to tell David, my partner, that we would have to spend a lot of money marketing to convince people to even care. Because banks aren't loved anywhere, but they're especially hated in Brazil. People have such horrible experiences. Nobody wakes up like excited, in the morning saying, "Oh, today I'm getting a bank account or I'm getting a credit card." Like it's not like a new phone or a car. Like people just hate even thinking about it. So ever since we started, we've been constantly surprised by the amount of traction, by the amount of just will and how ready consumers were for something like Nubank to come along. And what we saw just over the past couple of years was even more stunning. As you mentioned, we've hit the 40 million customer mark. Like we've more than doubled over the last year or so. Of course, the pandemic helped that because it was already bad enough for you to stand in a line in a bank branch or waste like 2 to 3 or 4 hours of your day whenever you needed to take care of something. During the pandemic, like that was even more so because people didn't want to expose themselves to that.
And once the pandemic is gone, do you think they're going to stay with you?
Well, that's what we've seen so far. We have very little churn, not to say zero, because there's no point. Like we're not charging people any fees. We're offering them a consistently better customer experience. So we do not see any churn at all. Like we continue to see even higher and higher levels of activation of these new accounts that we've gained through the pandemics.
And why do you think banks got it so wrong? I mean, you said they were more hated in Brazil than anywhere else in the world, but they are hated anywhere else in the world. So basically, why has it come to that?
I think it's been very cozy for them over the over the past few decades, right? Like it's a sector that is 30% of the GDP of the region, very high margins. It's ROEs that you don't see elsewhere, like north of 20%. And customers didn't have an alternative. Like if you felt that you weren't being served well by one of the banks, like where would you go? To the other one that was just like them? Like there wasn't really something that consumers could do. So it was very normal. You know this because you're Brazilian. Like it was very normal to see these rankings of complaints of the most complained companies in the world, in the country, and they were all banks. Like consistently for decades, like those are the companies that people complain the most about, and they were also paying some of the highest fees in the world and the highest interest rates in the world. So it was just really a bad experience that was continuing going in a very expensive one because of lack of competition. It was an oligopoly until we finally came along.
But you actually made a point of this being one of the more regulated industries in the world, and banks have a lot of power. As you said, they are 30% of GDP in the region. How are they fighting back? And are you worried that regulators are going to come and help banks in any way, or regulation is going to change, and then firms like Nubank are going to have a tougher time? Is that something that concerns you going forward?
Well, when we first started, we were very concerned. Being in a regulated sector means, things can change, and they will, right? Because technology brings new applications, and even society evolves in a way that requires regulators to adapt regulation to whatever context is here now. So that was part of the game. But what we didn't know was that regulators were just very excited about bringing finally some competition into this market. Like, they were also fed up of consumers being treated the way they were. So what we found was that the central bank in Brazil, they were very keen on having challengers coming in and offering better experience to consumers. So sure, there's regulatory risk always. Like, there's always things that can change. But what we've seen over the course of 8 years since we started Nubank was that these changes always happen in the direction of making customers' lives better, of making easier to compete within this sector, made it more simple to offer alternatives to customers. So we can say in the right direction, so to speak. So it's not really something that we're super concerned. That's not to say that banks haven't used their power to try and stop us in many ways. Like, they have. It's like that Gandhi quote. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. They're certainly fighting.
Chris, you've actually managed to build a business that, in the span of 8 years, is now worth $30 billion. What's next? I mean, if you look at financial technology, what's the next big innovation that needs to come?
Customers have been asking us to do all sorts of things. Like, customers wanted us to start airline companies, to start, utility companies. Everywhere where they see a bad experience, they want us to come in and fix that for them. And we're happy to do so. Right now, like, one of the latest things that we've launched was insurance, and that's a whole industry ready for disruption. We've launched one product yet, and there's certainly more to come that we can do to remove a lot of complexity out of that industry, for instance. Another one that you cover as well is on the asset management side. We recently bought the largest digital investment broker in Brazil, is Invest, and we're integrating that into our offer. And there's so much potential for us to offer investment products that were only like reserved for the wealthiest, richest, like private banking type of offering, to 40 million customers or more in Brazil, to really democratize access to much better investment products that can have a very significant impact in society here.
And what about crypto, Chris? I mean, is it something you guys are interested in? Do you own Bitcoin personally? What's your view on the matter?
I do own some Bitcoin. It's such an interesting technology, such a technology that has a lot of potential to be very transformative. As far as the assets go, we know that customers are so interested. There's a lot of demand all over the world for the asset class. So we're for sure looking into ways that we can serve that demand and make sure that our customers are having access to the best options out there if they want to have exposure to that asset class.
Chris, you're one of the handful of female founders at giant startups, at unicorns. Who are your inspirations? I mean, who do you think are the really creative thinkers in finance that you model yourself after?
Well, I gotta say there ain't many inspirations within finance. I look elsewhere. One of my main inspirations has always been Walt Disney, just everything that the Walt Disney Company does. I've been a big fan of their work, and there's a lot that we borrowed from them in terms of trying to make our customer experience as magical as it possibly can be. To draw from the way that they think about customer service and the way that they think about their customers or guests. So there's a lot that we borrow from that for sure. Other than that, there's a lot that we borrowed from Amazon. Like, they're so customer obsessed. That's something that we've been thinking about a lot since we started, like this day one mindset as well, just making sure that we're always hungry, that you're not resting on our laurels. That's something that is very present to us, very dear to us.
What do you say is the financial landscape going to look like, let's say, a decade or 5 years or 5 years from now? I mean, who do you think is going to end up surviving?
I think a lot of the traditional banking system is going to have a hard time surviving. Maybe they're going to become infrastructure, like utilities, the pipes like behind other companies are going to offer better experiences. They're going to design actually innovative products that people want, which is something that they've been failing at for decades. But a few of them, maybe, like, given how much access to capital they have, like how big they already are, like if they work really hard, they might be able to stick around. We'll see. What we know is that customers, now that they finally have alternatives, like they're not going to go back to settling for a bad experience. Like,
You mentioned that you don't see regulation as a big threat, but when you become big, doesn't it become a larger threat? I mean, do you think you can be slapped with the kind of regulations regulators have for big banks?
we, to some degree, already are, right? Like there's so many specific regulations that we already have to comply 100% with. If you think about money laundering prevention, if you think about cybersecurity, like there's so many angles of regulation that we already have the same burdens, the same hurdles as the big banks. So, I mean, regulators are smart and they're designing regulation in a proportional way for a reason. So I think as we grow, we're even less exposed to some degree to some of those fluctuations, because when you have one product, if there's one regulatory change in that product, is 100% of what you have. Like nowadays, in the case of Nubank, since we have credit cards, we have debit cards, we have an account product, we have personal loans, insurance, investments. It's hard to imagine a world in which there would be so many negative regulatory changes in all those different verticals that would impact us negatively, right?
Chris, just to wrap things up, because I've crossed the time a little bit, but what's your ultimate dream of Nubank? I mean, how would you say this is it with being successful? What do you see what would be like your dream for Nubank?
What I can say is that Latin America has so many people that are underbanked or even unbanked. You know, they have never had access to any type of financial services solution, and there is a dignity to having access that allows you to save money, that allows you to have access to credit, to become an entrepreneur, to be educated in a lot of ways, and to accomplish more in life. There's also the high amount of fees and the very high interest rates that people are paying all over those countries. And that's money that we've been saving customers in Brazil. We've saved people in Brazil over 20 billion reais in fees, that like in Brazil alone over the past few years. And that's money that could go into healthcare, into food, into education, into a lot of other things. So we do have big dreams in terms of being able to free many more people, like tens of millions or maybe hundreds of millions of people from all that complexity and all that financial burden, and to allow them to be the better version of themselves, like the optimal version of themselves when they have access and they have back control of their life and they have their dignity back.